Dobrý podvečer. Já vás vítám na debatě v rámci
Welcome to a debate which is part of the Inspiration Forum. My name is Vojtěch Boháč, and I will be hosting an interview with Illia, a journalist from Kiev-Independent, a war reporter, and our debate originally was planned to take place with more people, but the fact that Ukraine is at war causes trouble. We also wanted to have Taras Derkač and other colleagues we have spent quite a lot of time with reporting from Ukraine, but unfortunately they were stopped at the border and couldn't leave Ukraine because of some troubles with their documents, so unfortunately they were unable to come and join us for this debate. So I would like to welcome Illia Ponomarenko, a journalist from Kiev-Independent. Welcome. We will now start our debate, and I will be happy if you take part in it too. I cannot really see the audience well because the lights are not on, but if you have any questions, you will be given the mic and you can ask them so that this program is interactive and inclusive. Okay, let's start. My first question. Kiev-Independent is an English-speaking medium which became the voice of Ukraine toward the rest of the world during the recent months. So I wonder, you have people in the medium who are Ukrainian. You would like Ukraine to win the war, of course, but the role of a journalist is to be critical and to speak up when something is wrong. So I wonder, how do you conceal this dilemma? Because your homeland is under attack, and you might tend to not be critical toward your homeland, but a journalist is a person who is critical, by definition.
The problem is that there is no real dilemma in this issue. Yes, as journalists in Ukraine, we definitely stand for the independence of our country. We definitely want our country to win because we see this as the just cause, as a very black and white situation, because we know it. We know what is at stake. We know the situation very clear. And therefore, since we want our nation to win, we are being honest about this. And since we want our country to win, we are open and we are very vocal about the problems that prevent our nation from winning. So if we have a situation of, for instance, a corrupt official in the Ukrainian leadership or the military, if we have something, should we be talking about, should we criticize our leadership? The answer is, of course, yes, because by doing that, we help eradicate problems. Therefore, we bring the victory closer to our nation. So this applies to absolutely anything, any situation in which we, as honest journalists in front of our audience, can make a conclusion and say that there is a problem, there is something that needs to be criticized and needs to be eradicated. This is exactly what we do at the Kiev-Independent. And in general, the media community in Ukraine is very critical, is very open to criticism. There is no real wartime criticism, no wartime censorship in Ukraine. Everybody is capable of criticizing the leadership, everyone, everything. Facebook is one big hot debate about anything that's happening in the country in wartime too. So the balance is the honesty. By criticizing, we help make the victory closer to us.
Je to něco, co chápe v současné době dobře i Ukrajina?
Is it also understood by the Ukrainian government right now? Because, for example, when you have a new government that takes the lead. They start by being very open, but maybe after several months they start to be more sensitive toward criticism. They can sense this as undermining their position, as just really undermining their position. So has this evolved, the will of the government to be criticized?
I don't think that something has really changed over the months of war. In general, the media space and the relationship between media and authorities in Ukraine have always been pretty critical, and it was very possible and very acceptable and very welcoming for everyone to criticize everything on social media, anywhere, in any form, and it remains the same situation up to this day. Like I said, Ukrainian Facebook is a hot place in which everyone knows it better about all things possible. So I don't think that something has changed. We do not have censorship except for sensible information that might jeopardize the actual combat situation of the military, to which general audience rarely has any connection. And also incidents like incoming missiles and the immediate aftermath of incoming missiles. So it's a general rule upon media, among government agencies, that we do not post things like explosions, the aftermath of explosions immediately after these incidents, so that we do not provide Russians with the immediate information from ground zeros. Other than that, we do not have any very strictly followed instructions and bans on something. It's pretty open, and we're in a pretty good situation, and we're really glad about this.
Already before the start of this debate, we spoke together about the topic of embedded journalists. During the last decade, in several conflicts, not only in Ukraine, it is common that the army doesn't let journalists to move freely on the territory, but there are programs, and the leadership or the commanders let journalists go to some territories when it is suitable. So what actually happens in this situation when you or your colleagues work there? What can we learn from you, and what cannot we learn, what the military doesn't want to have published?
Normally, the situation is the following. For instance, when we had this Kharkiv region offensive operation, of cities like Izium or Kupiansk or Balaklia were liberated in September, and basically 2-3 maybe days after that, journalists followed. That was in the form of press tours organized by the authorities, or many journalists just decided to go on their own and take cars and just rush to there and work from there and bring stories from there. Normally, when it comes to press tours, the military or civilian authorities just notify journalists that there is an opportunity to go there. We provide transport. They bring us to a newly liberated town such as Balaklia, for instance, or Izium in Kharkiv Oblast. And they just let us out and say that you have one day and you talk to whoever you want, you do whatever you want, you make pictures of whatever you want, and by the end of the day, please make sure to be back to the bus and we'll take you back to Kharkiv. They do not have real influence on what we write about, and normally we have quite a freedom in terms of what we want to see in this regard. I don't think that I ever faced the situation in which I had something that the military, in the battlefields, the military did not want to see published. When it comes to things the military does not want to see, it's about things that concern battlefield situation. For instance, posting pictures from battlefields on which the enemy can geolocate certain objects and to use them for targeting. So, but these are very, very rare things that not many journalists face. Only mostly all those who get embedded with the military. So, like I said, it's pretty open, it's pretty okay, and in most cases, 99% of the cases, the journalists just follow the military within hours in new liberated territories. So we're in a pretty good situation in this regard.
Díky za odpověď. Podívám se, jestli tu má někdo otázku.
Thank you for your response. I will take a look if there are any questions in the crowd. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And I see that we actually do have a question. Somebody is reaching the audience with the mic. And here we go. Hello. I would like to ask about the critical information that you've mentioned. You said that you're trying to report critically about the Ukrainian government, about what is happening in Ukraine. And I would like to know whether you know how much of this information are used, or maybe rather misused, by Russian media. Thank you for the question.
Some, in our situation, Russians can use anything at their disposal. They are absolutely free to twist any sort of information to their favor and to make everything out of anything. So, in reality, you can't just win with these people, as Americans say. We can, for instance, criticize certain international legion units for corruption, for violence inside the unit, for very questionable, questionable attitude on the battlefields, because we get complaints from their fellow soldiers, and Russians can use this information, interpreting this as, hey, the whole idea of international legion is just corrupting, is scrubbling. The NATO mercenaries are not an organized force. They're useless against victorious Russian forces. So it makes really little sense to think about how would Russia use this information. What makes sense is to stay honest, to post and verifiable and reliable information. Because of this, to be very careful about what you say in terms of the accuracy of what you say and what you report to public, to be truthful, to be honest, and simply say the truth. Be in Ukraine, being a journalist is a curse because it's very hard in wartime. It's very intense, but also it's a blessing because you don't have to lie. The situation is quite clear. You don't have to conceal anything. So you just work being honest and trying to reach out to your audience that trusts you.
Thank you. You actually describe what your approach is, but I would like to know, Ukraine is a country in war, right? And in February or March, when I worked there, I could feel that the emotions about what is okay to write and what is not are quite tense. We know it from Czechia as well, because quite often you can hear that when we criticize something, for example, when we criticize the Ukrainian approach, the Ukrainian government, there appears a crowd of people who say that this is to Russia's benefit. How much or to what extent is this happening in Ukraine? When you face this criticism, what happens? You said that this is your personal approach, that you are persuaded of being honest in this situation, but how hard is this for the journalists?
I don't think that it's a big problem for us Ukrainians, because there will always be someone who thinks that by criticizing someone or by exposing problems we work for Russians. I don't know. Once upon a time, not me, but our KI guys, they had an investigation. It was very headline making about the international legion, that they have in certain unit they have a lot of problems like corruption, violence. I can describe this. So yeah. There could be some people who said that exposing these problems benefits Russia, but in reality, this benefits Ukraine, because we are standing for getting rid of those problems. So I don't think that it makes sense to listen to such voices who do not understand the real role of journalism, especially in wartime, when we are so on the edge and we are so in a critical need of eradicating our problems and being as effective as possible. So, and also this is a sort of a case-by-case study, because sometimes by saying that Ukrainian authorities are not doing a correct policy by resisting Russian aggression, the Ukrainian leadership should just give up for the sake of saving lives. I don't think that works as a good faith criticism. So in this case, this does not look good as a criticism and does not look good as something that really supports Russian narrative about this. So it's a case-by-case study, really.
Thank you. I have another question that I've been wondering about for quite some time now. And I remember that in February, March, April, when I worked in Ukraine, I was quite surprised about how often we met people in Kyiv or in Mykolaiv and many other places, or in Donbass too, where there were people who weren't blaming Russia for what happened. They weren't blaming Russian government. But in the following months, increasingly, I would say, there are voices coming from Ukraine saying that this war was caused by Russia, that every Russian citizen is personally responsible for this. And in the last month, I'm hearing quite a lot. Also, at the opening ceremony of this festival, it was said that the only way out is that Russia would actually decompose into smaller administrative units. I also read an interview with you where you were quite critical about this question. So I would like to know whether you have seen a similar development in Ukraine or in the Ukrainian public, or whether I understood this incorrectly. Tell me.
Yes, of course, it's very obvious. This is exactly what's happening since February, because in the light of what Russia has done in terms of destroying cities, wiping out whole regions, committing insane barbarities just in the eyes of those people who had some illusions maybe about Russia, about Kremlin, about what it is actually, what the Kremlin is and what the Kremlin regime is, what they are capable of. As someone who's originally from Donbass, I have the whole family in there, and I have a history of living there. So I have lived most of my life in Donbass, and two of my most dear cities of Donbass have been just razed to the ground. I'm talking about Mariupol and Volnovakha, my hometown. I can tell you that yes, many people from my circle of communication, they have changed their minds. Many are ashamed of what they have believed over the years before February came. Many feel bad about this, and many just swap their opinion and change their minds about what's happening. So because those who have good heart, those who have a brain in their head, he or she has seen what's happened because of Russia, how many cities have been destroyed, how much blood had been spilled about this. So yeah, definitely they changed their minds about Russia. And when it comes to the second part of the question, the demolition of Russia, I don't think that's in Ukraine's best interest, to be honest. If Russia is absolutely destabilized and decomposes into many conflicting republics or breakaway territories. On one hand, yes, an internal strife inside Russia would probably be a relief upon Ukraine and Russian imperial ambitions. But on the other hand, it's not a complete answer to what we want, a complete security from Russia, because we end up having dozens of enclaves fighting each other, and also probably fighting Ukraine in the region. So the whole region will be absolutely destabilized. So I think that this is increasingly probable scenario, given the fact that so many fractions beyond Kremlin are gaining power right now. I'm talking about Wagner or Kadyrovtsi. But I'm afraid this is not very positive scenario for us in this regard.
Takže třeba tady to v současné době poměrně často.
So the voices that we tend to hear for Russia decomposing is something that we should maybe perceive here in the West, in the European Union, as a call of Ukraine to ensure its security. Maybe it's radical, but is it something that could protect Ukraine from the development that we've seen since February?
Again, it's a very debatable question, and it's a question where we do not know and can predict many other things that are part of such event. Those who call for full decomposition of Russia, mostly it's about emotions, of course. It's very natural for Ukrainians to have such emotions towards the aggressor state, of course. But and yes, probably this decomposition, the internal strife would be a relief for Ukraine. But then again, it remains to be seen if the internal strife and the absolutely civil war inside Russia among manufacturers would leave Ukraine in rest. I'm not sure about this. I'm absolutely not sure about this. So, and besides, this is something that that has so many unknown members in this equation. So, and the war is so hard to predict for the future. It's so full of surprises. So, I think that for now we should be not thinking about the decomposition of Russia, but denying Russia of its capability to go on fighting this war, physically denying this capability in terms of resources and many other factors. So let's strip them of this ability and we'll see what happens next.
You yourself come from Volnovacha, which for me is one of the most tragic cases of war, at least in the last 8 months. When I'm hearing the stories from Volnovacha about people who left at the very last moment and about what is left from the city, I'm very sad because I lived in Ukraine for 2 years, and as a journalist I happened to be in many situations where I had to really keep my calm and try to avoid hatred, because if you see and hear all these stories, it's really hard to keep your calm. So I would like to know, what is it like for you, as for a person who is coming from this tragic place with such a tragic history? How do you work with these emotions, and how are you able to work objectively and keep your calm and work in a constructive way?
Yes, indeed. It's very hard for me personally, because obviously my hometown has been destroyed. The city of my student years have been destroyed. So many memories, so many emotions, friends. Of course, this is something that as a journalist, as a Ukrainian, you have to work this out inside your brain, inside your soul, in the night, and you have to reprocess these emotions and this bitter feeling in your soul into something that fuels your work. So you're a journalist, you have a chance to help change this situation. You have a chance to change the world. So you have seen what they have done to your world. So now you have the full motivation to get this over with, to help get this done, and to get the humankind rid of this, because you have seen what happens, what this thing brings for people. So it's a fuel for more motivation. It's a fuel for not giving up on this and spending basically 95% of your life dedicated to work, because you work for the sake of killing this. The thing that has killed the best memories of your youth and your house and your home. So it's a fuel for more work.
S tím částečně souvisí, já se hodně často zamýšlím nad tím, že když jsme se
I'm quite often thinking about the moment when we came back from the front line, when we came back to Europe, back to Czechia, and we went on holiday to Italy, actually. And after leaving these places in Ukraine, when you constantly hear the sounds of bombing, of shelling, when you hear these terrible stories, there was something changing in my mind, and I had terrible nightmares. It was lasting for many, many months. And when there was a storm, for example, I was waking up suddenly and I felt like there was a bombing again, even though I wasn't in Ukraine anymore. And if you spend so much time near the front line hearing these things, I need to ask myself, what is the war doing with people who are coming to the front line? And what is happening with these people who work with this information 95% of their time and who are constantly in contact with these things? How do you help yourself? Is there any kind of psychological hygiene that you can perform? Or is it something you can't really avoid?
This is something you can't really avoid, but there are things that you must understand as you work as a journalist in Ukraine. First is that you call yourself a journalist in Ukraine, therefore you're a wartime journalist in a country that is in war, so that's why you do not have a job, you have a service to your community, to your country. It's not about the service to the military or service to the government, you serve your people. So when you serve a service, you do not complain, you serve, you do your duty, you get all of your strength, and you work. Of course, what's happening to many Ukrainian journalists, especially those who work with intense information, in intense conditions. Of course, it's about fatigue. It's about collecting things that not many people want to have in their heads. It's about knowing so many faces of people that are not alive anymore because of this war. It's about losing a lot of people that you knew from the military and from civilian life. It's about seeing so many pictures of them on Facebook, so many pictures of children who have died because of this. Also on social media, the sounds of war fighting. So to me, it's something I just made an agreement with myself, is that I work in the most intense way until I can, until the end of the war, and then I will probably stop doing this. I will simply get myself over with war journalism, because I have seen more than enough for myself. But in this regard, I can't speak for the rest of the guys working in Ukraine, but I can speak for myself. It's just I'm a bit lucky in this regard, because I had quite an experience of working in the conflict zone before this. So I have a pretty low barrier for fear. It's what happens when city is getting bombed. It's quite understandable to me. I know how this feels, so I've been there before. So I get it easier than most of the people that I know. And I help rationalize these feelings and emotions for them. I know when it's real danger and when it's not, when Kiev gets bombed. So I try to help my loved ones with this. But yeah, working as a journalist in Ukraine is taking its toll, but it's a service. This is what we have to do.
Ona je to práce v neustálém napětí a
you work in constant tension and your work never ends. So how does this influence a journalist working for 8 months in this situation? What is the influence of this long-term fatigue on you, or do you even admit it to yourself?
Well, it's a sort of a fatigue, but it's mostly, like I said, I've had my experience as a wartime journalist. So it's mostly for me, it's a usual fatigue from work, from work in itself, because it's intense work. So sometimes you just get overloaded with this. But I don't think that I have emotional fatigue about this war. I just decided that I've had more than enough about military stuff, about things connected to the war. So for the future, for myself, I want to work with something more peaceful, like science, for instance, or nature, or something that not related to war. you have to have something else in your life when you have a chance.
Díky. Obrátím se zase na publikum.
Okay. Another question for our audience. Do you have questions that you would like to ask? I can see a hand, so please wait for the mic.
Dobrý den, Ilio. Příjemnou shodou okolností.
Good afternoon, Illia.
Na Twitteru už asi od
I
začátku války.
have been following you on Twitter since the start of the war, so thank you so much for your work and for being
V
here.
mediálním prostoru se už nějakou dobu
In
objevuje
the
zpráva
media
o
space,
použití,
a message has been circling about a so-called dirty bomb.
Samozřejmě obviňuje Ukrajinu.
Russia is speaking about Ukraine, preparing this, but we know that this is standard Russian tactics, just blaming something on Ukraine, something that they actually did or that they are planning to do. So maybe they are just preparing the ground for another operation under false flag. Also, they are spreading the news about mining the Kachov dam. So I wonder what you as a journalist think about this, what the development will be like.
Díky za otázku.
The problem behind such claims from Russian side is that they're so rational, they are so numerous, and they are so not connected with reality that it makes little sense to try to rationalize them and try to what stands behind this. What stands behind this is that Russians have like two main battlefields for this war. One is the actual battlefield that happens in where actual hostilities go on, and another one is the informational warfare, in which they use all possible weapons available, and sometimes they're not very competitive and not very smart about this. So they keep bringing this propagandistic messages about biolabs, about Ukrainian nuclear program, I don't know, about zombie soldiers. Now it's about dirty bomb. Now it's about the Kakhovka dam on the Dnipro River. Somehow they think that such bold claims, such headline-making claims, they infiltrate into world media, especially when it comes to countries like China, India, and maybe, as they believe, this might give them more support and more anti-Ukrainian sentiment. So I would not see anything else behind that.
Díky za odpověď.
Thank you for your reply. This makes me think that when we came to Kyiv before the start of the war and we had an interview at the Ministry of Defense, I asked the ministry if they thought that the war would begin. They told us that the information was unclear, but that the worst thing to do was to scare Ukrainians into being too frightened and leave the country and not defend it. Couldn't this actually also apply to your media? You are an English-speaking medium. Do you see a pressure, or do you feel a pressure not to scare the West into thinking that there really is a risk of nuclear weapon being used by Russia? Because then we would be frightened and maybe we would be reluctant to continue supporting Ukraine. What do you think about this? What do you think the reactions to your journalism can be in the West?
The thing is that we never post information, we never quote Russian officials or Ukrainian officials just because they said so. We rationalize things. For instance, if we talk about the threat of nuclear weapons, we actually had the story about this several weeks ago. And what we did in the story, we tried to rationalize the whole problem. We tried to give answer, how likely is this, why this, likely or not likely. So instead of emotions, instead of bold claims, we explain things, we try to analyze, rationalize this, as many people read such stories and which do not simply make claims but also try to dig into this problem. People rationalize this problem, they have it beyond emotions but rational thinking. So it makes attitude towards such problem in a more rationalized manner. So I don't think that our stories can scare, because we're not scared. We explain it and we're trying to ascertain the problem for our readers.
Nenarážíte někdy na limity toho, že
Don't you sometimes have to face the limitations, given that before the start of the invasion, many people said that rationally Russia shouldn't and wouldn't attack you because they just wouldn't make it. Many people saw this as irrational, but still Putin gave the order to start the invasion. So should we actually believe in rationality when this is planned?
Of course it's not. I'm not saying about Russian rationality. I'm saying about our rationality in understanding what they're doing. And part of this rationality of our understanding rather than emotional stance is understanding that, yes, we have certain instruments. For instance, when it comes to nuclear weapons, we have certain instruments in which we will see this. And we know that there are factors that make such an outcome unlikely, and we understand that China, for instance, and India does not want this. There will be a harsh response from this country. So this and many other factors make it not likely. But at the same time, we're not saying it's impossible, because we know that Russia has been deeply irrational about what it is doing. And one of those things, which was correctly stated, one of those things that they were not rational about is invading Ukraine with what they have and invading Ukraine as such. So, of course, being rational also includes understanding that Russian leadership are not rational about this. They can do whatever they want, and they tend to be making really bad mistakes.
Díky. Zeptám se.
Okay. Do we have more questions from the audience? I see one person.
Dobrý den.
Good evening.
Jeden dotaz.
I just want to check if Illia is still there. Can you still hear us? Because we don't see you. I know that before the start of this...
Okay. Just 30 seconds, because my laptop is dying. So let me just plug it in, and I'll be back in 20 seconds. Okay? Just 20 seconds. Meanwhile, you can ask your questions. I'm listening to you. Okay?
Dobrá, tak tím pádem těch 20 vteřin využijem k položení.
Okay, so let's make use of these 20 seconds to ask the question. Okay, so I have a question. Based on the information we receive, generally it's information coming from Ukraine and then traveling the world. So I wonder if there is a censorship or a quasi-censorship on the news that come from the world to Ukraine, because here in the European Union or elsewhere in the world, there are certainly voices saying, well, we don't care. What should we do about this? It's not our problem. And this would be really demotivating, right? So is there a censorship on what is let in Ukraine, in the direction from the world to Ukraine? A real censorship, or just maybe an effort to encourage people, or an internal censorship?
There's no real censorship about this, because it's not possible, because there is no real control over the whole of informational space in Ukraine. I seriously doubt that it's possible at all in the age when everybody has an access to Facebook, to Twitter, to any social media, where everything and everyone is present, including all media outlets possible. The government in Ukraine, authorities in Ukraine, they have control over something that we call the national marathon, which is like constant 24/7 live news streams that concern some of the country's biggest TV channels. But yeah, on these channels, the leadership has control over agenda. Basically, it's just a government-held media outlets. They speak all the same. The constant flow of newsreels. Yes, in this regard, they have the control over what's being said. But the thing is that this is one just so many sources of information that are available in the ocean of Ukrainian media space, and not many people really watch TV in Ukraine, and not many people really trust these things, because most people in Ukraine get news from the internet, in which there are no limits on the information, basically, on this information, especially when it comes to Telegram.
Díky, já bych trochu navázal tady na
Thank you. I have a follow-up. I had a similar question to this. You are an English-speaking editing board. You are often quoted by the Western media. They approach you, they ask you questions. So I wonder, how do you see the difference between what is written in Ukraine and what is written in the UK, in the US, in Germany, in Western Europe? Do you think there is a major difference? Some topics that maybe are not well understood, not well presented in the West?
I must say that Western journalism, global journalism in general, is doing a great job in Ukraine. I must admit it. We owe, as a nation, to all the top media outlets that had been present in Ukraine. Basically, absolutely all of the world's top media outlets have been present in Ukraine, in Kiev, during the Battle of Kiev. I don't think that if we were reduced to the Ukrainian media covered the situation, I don't think that the Ukrainian war would have so much media coverage and so much support in the world's public opinion. So I say that we often see very, very good things, very top quality things written about Ukraine, not necessarily things that we like. That journalists do a good job. They do insightful journalism about what our command is doing, what was the situation before the invasion, for instance. What they tell a lot of personal stories, lots of terrific pictures about this. So I seriously believe that in Ukraine, particularly in places like Bucha, journalism as a notion has proved itself and demonstrated why journalism matters, because it shows you what needs to be done, what's bad about this world, and what needs to be dealt with in this world. So I don't think that we have some major topics missing in Ukraine, because I keep thinking about what Western journalists write about, and basically we are on the same line. I don't think that, except for some very minor details, that they're missing something, because a lot of attention has been paid on Ukraine, and we are really thankful about this.
Ono poprvé se o Ukrajině, nebo ne poprvé, ale od té doby, co začala válka, tak vlastně dá se říct, že se
From the beginning of war, it can be said that Ukrainian situation became extremely covered in the Western media. It started with Maidan, then Crimea situation, and now the war. So since 2015, there was a decrease of this interest, but now this interest is much more intense than before, I would say. I would like to ask, was there any change in your opinion? Because right before that, you already started working in English-speaking media. So can you see any difference between the foreign coverage of the Ukrainian situation before the beginning of the war and after?
Mm-hmm. Of course, there was a difference. Yes, there was a difference because in many ways, because the Russian war against Ukraine before February 24th, it was always a fading conflict. In general, this war has never had any, natural, serious reasons. It never wanted to continue. So for years before that, we had a situation in which there was no real war and no real peace. Because without, foreign intervention, without external force that fuels this war, the war is not happening. So there is no real hatred between the two sides. There's no real reasons for them to fight. The only reason for this war to take place was the influence of Russia, the direct effect of Russia in Crimea and also in the east. And it's natural that since there have been basically no events of in this war, the front line before this year was was the place that I called the place where time stands still, because you go to the front line, nothing really happens. It's a very routine. It's eventless. So it's very static, very stable, very boring. Well, that's why, of course, in such a situation, in this very unnatural war that does not want to be fought, of course, global media started losing attention because it's just a void of nothingness about this. This war could easily be ended with just a snap, and nothing would prevent it from this, except for the master of this war. But of course, with the coming of this pre-war crisis, this transition of war during autumn and early winter, and the war itself, of course, it's a unique situation. It's an insane situation, given our day and age. It's the biggest conflict since World War II, of course. And the situation is so black and white and so univocal about the role of an aggressor and the victim, that of course, so many people are interested in this. There are so many stories about this, so many tragic things that needs to be demonstrated in front of the world, and the role of it of public opinion is so important that yes, there is definitely lots and lots of work for journalism here in any aspect.
Thank you very much. I can see that we have another question from the crowd, so let's wait for the mic. Okay. You said that journalism is now some kind of a service for you. Could you maybe tell us, how does your publishing office work? What is happening in The Independent right now? I don't know to what extent you can tell us. Of course, you can't cover all the details, but how about the salary? How about encryption? What kind of characteristics of journalists are the most important ones? So what are the changes and details in this war background?
I'm not at my newsroom right now because I'm in Amsterdam for a short trip, but hopefully I'll be back. I'll be back home on weekends. So the wartime newsroom is basically the same newsroom with people who are dedicated to work at any time of day. We do not have real vacations and holidays, no weekends, no like 100% weekends of work. Being a wartime journalist demands a lot of readiness for you. That could include readiness to work just in the middle of the night or the whole night. It's about dedication to just get up and go to the front line within hours. It's about dedication to bring as many stories as possible. It's about dedication to collect as much information and educate yourself about the military, about how it works, about tactics, about weapons. It's about spending a lot of time for getting the understanding what's going on to the front, how the front line map look like, what's the tendency, where are the most vivid events of what's happening on the front line. You have to be always knowing what happens to this and that point on the front line. So you have to be always thinking about weapon supplies. You have to know everything about these weapons, these new weapons, and why they matter, how they work, so you could be able to answer these questions to your reader. You have to always understand the tendency. You see the tendency so that you could explain and talk about this with your readers. We work at the office. We have a mixture of being online and offline. I mean, present in the office. We have a small office in Podil right now at this moment. When in Kiev we have air raid sirens, our guys go to a basement that is a bar. So at the same time, it's a air raid shelter and a bar. So, and they keep working in there. So they plug in their laptops in the bar, so they keep working. So the work never stops. At the KI, we have several teams that cover constant news that have this news feed. That includes people who are not in Ukraine, but they are, for instance, in Canada, in America, and they cover night shifts when there's nighttime in Ukraine. They work because it's daytime, obviously, for them. We collect as many possibilities and opportunities to go to the front line or talk to people and get deployed to somewhere, and to tell stories about civilians and about military. We get any possible opportunities to go to places like NATO headquarters and talk to officials about this, and it helps. The way we get our money is it's almost 100% dependent on public support. We have 8,000 supporters on Patreon. So the Kyiv Independent as media as a media outlet works just thanks to supporters and regular people from across the world. We do not depend on just one name with the money back.
Díky.
In general, it's a company of friends from all across the world, from Japan, from Britain, from the US, Ukraine, Israel, and we stay friends for many years. So we stay as a family for many years. We spend a lot of time together working for many years. It's an international young team of people who are dedicated about this war. And I must say that foreigners, for instance, guys from France, Australia, the US, they're also very passionate about Ukraine. So they as passionate as us in Ukraine, and they live in Ukraine, and they have connections and ties in Ukraine. They have Ukrainian wives and girlfriends, for instance, and they feel really passionate about the fate of this country. They really want this. They're so enthusiastic about this, as enthusiastic as we are as Ukrainians.
Díky.
Thank you. Let me take a look if there are more questions. And I see a hand risen. I would like to follow up on what the previous question was. You said that it tends to be quite emotionally intensive and that you have a certain advantage because you already know what is happening in war, you have this experience, and that some colleagues are not that well off in this situation. So I would like to ask whether you have any kind of psychological help that you can offer, or what is your general approach in your office? So whether you all go to this bar, you have a drink together, and that's how we cope, or what do you do?
Basically, yes, we stay together when it happens. Not every one of us go to the office all the time. We have like a free attendance policy, but everyone should know what everyone's doing in this regard. So I'm not saying that I'm a sort of a John Rainbow or something, but people get adapted to any circumstances. It just becomes your new norm for this. And since I had some understanding of how weapons work, of how artillery works, or how drones work, I sometimes when people ask me, or when people know this, they ask me questions. They ask me questions. Do I think that these Iranian drones are a grave danger to every one of us here in the city? Or they ask me, do you think we should be really worried about the threat of nuclear weapons against Kiev or against any other place in Ukraine? So I'm not giving them easy answers, but I help them rationalize, for instance, their understanding of how military works, of how nuclear weapons work, tactical nuke works. And when I explain them and try to rationalize this knowing in this situation for them, so they feel much better for this, because most of the human emotions, such as fear, comes from little understanding of what you really fear. When you have some more knowledge, when you are better informed about things that you're supposed to be afraid of, it gives you more reassurance. So you understand them better, and you have more rational aspect rather than emotions that get you blinded. But yeah, we do things like going down to the basement. We have some, we continue working in there. We really talk to each other. For instance, sometimes, what was complicated was the day when, the day of the drone attack a couple of weeks ago, the Iranian drones bombed Kiev. So yeah, sometimes it just makes sense to talk to your colleague about this, to listen to him or her. Before that, I remember the day when on Monday, Russians bombed a thermal station in Kiev, pretty close to the place where I've been, and just up in front of that place that I was, a colleague of mine lives. He was really worried because he had barely had understanding what's going on. He saw the Russian cruise missile for the first time in his life. So we walked out, we had a chat in the park. We even went to see one of the places where that were hit by Russians in Shevchenko Park in Kiev. Sometimes people just need someone to be with them and help them, just calm down and get down with emotions. So solidarity and friendly interconnection really matters.
Thank you so much. Maybe one question from me. You are an important voice communicating between Ukraine and the rest of the world, at least English-speaking world. You already said that you are quite independent from outer financial sources. Do you maybe have some interesting, maybe bizarre stories where somebody tried to influence you in what you inform? For example, if Elon Musk tweeted you and told you that you should write something about Ukraine, or any other subject really. It's hard to imagine, but are there any, attempts to influence you like this?
There have been attempts, but it's always in the form of, hey, can you have a look at this? We think, this is what Ukrainian officials sometimes send me. Hey, can you have a look at this? We think that's important to demonstrate for the to the Western audience. So can you please maybe retweet this if you find this really interesting and too. So sometimes I do this, sometimes I don't. It depends on my opinion if I think that's worthwhile. But other than that, it's us who decides what needs to be published and in what form it needs to be published, because we answer in front of our consciousness and in front of our journalistic standards and in front of our audience that trusts us. So that's why there is so much trust towards us, just because we stay open and we work for no one but the actual people who reads us. So we belong to people who need us, and we work for them. So one of my worst nightmares is that we do something really bad and we lose this trust and lose this, very truthful, almost personal connection with the audience. So people stop loving us and start decrying us for what we've done. So of course we appreciate this trust, and we try to keep up with expectations in this regard.
War, as such, is a very difficult environment for informing. Sometimes it is difficult to fact-check information. So was there a major fuck-up that you maybe did in your newsroom that you had to deal with and you had to prevent from happening in the future? Or what are the challenges of today's times?
Yes, of course, we are human beings. We are operating in very complicated ocean of information that is boiling, that is hard. Sometimes it's hard to cope with. Of course, I'm not sure if I can get you like exact, factual mistakes about this. I don't think that we had like real major groundbreaking, just reputation destroying mistakes, because we still, after all, we try to pay a lot of attention to this. We have high standards and we're demandful towards ourselves in this regard. But of course, there have been mistakes, of course, but all of them were not intentional. All of them were just honest mistakes because of the complexity of the situation. That's why we taught ourselves into being careful with the assertions. If we report something and we are not 150% sure that it's true, this is exactly what's happened, So we try to be careful and present this as someone says this, but we do not have verification behind this. So there are always things that you can do to make sure that your reader knows it, that it's not 100% verified information. So you should be careful. Or we also sometimes tend to be not rushing in before publishing something, even though we can have pretty reliable resource and source about this, but sometimes news sounds so crazy that sometimes it makes sense to wait a bit before we post it, before we publish this. Of course, mistakes happen, but we try to make as little of them as possible.
Takže žádná historka, na kterou
So no funny story, no funny fuck up that everyone remembers in the newsroom. Nothing like that.
When it comes to running jokes in the newsroom, it's not about fuck ups, but mostly about I don't know, the fact that I got 1 million followers on Twitter. It's absolutely unforgettable running joke in the newsroom. So everyone has an obligation of pinning a joke against this every single day at the Kyiv Independent, especially following some interview at a very major Ukrainian publication that said that I'm, when it comes to Twitter following, I'm the number 2 after Vladimir Zelensky, the president. Ever since then, every single day, someone remembers this headline. Someone wants to pun me on this. So yeah, we have a lot of fun in the newsroom because, like I said, we are a team of pretty close friends. So we always have internal jokes. So if someone interested, he or she is very welcome to our newsroom and to see the atmosphere of absolutely unending joking spree in this newsroom.
Jaké to je, když jdete do baru?
How is it when you go to the bar under your newsroom and you have a couple of beers, but you know that there is a mass destruction weapon, which is a Twitter account which has also many followers? Don't you get threatened or afraid?
No, I don't. Why? It's not that we drink a lot during air raid science. Guys have some food, some meals. I sometimes get a couple of beers. Easy going work. You have to do this. You have to adapt to complicated situations and stressful situations such as air raid sirens, especially when we see bombings that come from nowhere, such as Iranian drones. They are very hard to detect, so sometimes they come from nowhere and attack not military objects that could be expected as subject for attack, but civilian houses and playgrounds. So you have to convert, you have to adapt to all those things. Yeah, for instance, we have to conserve energy. So the streets of Kyiv and many other cities are dark in the evening, but still people get adapted to this. So there's unusual nightlife, singers, guitar players in the streets, people hanging out, bars working, but almost in the absolute dark of the streets. No street lights, nothing. You just have to do this to go on with your life. Otherwise, you'll just go cuckoo.
Okay, thank you. I think we will have 1 or 2 last questions, or maybe 3. My question regarding the Twitter is do you feel a special responsibility about what you share? Do you think about what you share because you have so many followers?
Of course, yes. It's an additional job to me, I would say. And with such an audience, first thing is that I did not feel that I kind of deserved this audience. I just ended up being the guy who's a journalist in the wartime in pretty unique situation. And I was still in something that many people needed. So it's not about me being talented or something. It's just me being in a situation where I have things to tell people, and people were interested about these things. But yes, given such an attention, it's always an additional job for me, and this is something that I need to think twice before I post something, before I tweet something, because many people can interpret things in the wrong way without you even thinking about, you know, those things that they might pop up. This is not about censorship as such. This is about thinking that there are many people, and many people have different backgrounds, and many people are from different countries, and many people are from countries that are not the same as Ukraine, and which standards of you know, social communication are not the same as we in Ukraine. So you have to understand this, and you have to avoid things that you'll be ashamed before yourself after this. So I try to do this. I try to try to be responsible in front of what I say, what I hear. But I also tried not to be, you know, dull, not to be too focused on this. I try to be easygoing and have to very trustful and almost personal connection with my readers. So I like it when many people see me as, you know, our guy in Ukraine who we trust. I think it's very good for very good journalistic role in this day and age when everyone has connection on social media with everyone.
Díky. Máme ještě otázku? Vidím vzadu.
Any other questions from the audience?
Dobrý večer. Děkuji obou.
Good evening. Thank you to you both for what you are doing. I always saw Ukraine before the war as a divided country. The West was seen as lagging behind the industrial East. So what about now, when there is a common threat? Are people from the West ready to fight for the East?
This is happening. This has happened for 8 years. But you very correctly said that now the whole of the nation, truly the whole of the nation, has a one common threat. So the guy from, let's say, Zaporizhia is on the same boat, is in the same boat like the guy in Lviv or Ivano-Frankivsk. These guys from two different opposite sides of the country now have something as what we call a national myth, a common idea, truly unifying idea. So no matter what language they speak, no matter what confession they belong to, right now they end up in the same trench. They end up in the same idea of resisting Russian aggression, of saving this country, and continuing to have this country and developing this country in the post-war period. Now, the guy from Uzhhorod, the very extreme of this, extreme west of this country, has the same dream as the guy who was in Donbass, like myself. We all dream the same dream right now, which is getting rid of this war and stopping this war and stopping this nightmare and saving this nation, because you know, the survival of this country, of this nation, as it is, as a democratic republic, as an independent nation, many things depend on this survival, such as even our lives, our properties, our way of life, all these things that we love in here, the people in Lviv and the people in Donbass as well. So yeah, now the country is as unified as never before in its history. And I think that compared to most countries of the world, Ukraine is one of the most focused and most unified, nationally unified nations in the world because of the face of the foreign threat, of course.
Thank you. And the last question, it will be very quick. What do you think should be the headline right now, speaking about what is happening in Ukraine right now? What is the most important thing to know now at the end of October, after 8 months of war?
I think the most important thing is that Ukraine is now trying to survive the winter time. the upcoming winter time, and in order against Russian criminal strikes on infrastructure, and Russians want to basically force the Ukrainian population into surrendering by denying our access to electricity, to heating during winter time. Of course, it's a massive war crime about this, but this is the most problematic challenge in this regard. So probably the headline would be the war between Ukrainian electricity workers and Iranian drones. We'll see what wins in this war, but I do not expect Ukrainians to just give up after Bucha, after so many things, just to give up, because sometimes they could be cut off electricity for several hours. That's not going to happen.
Díky za odpověď. Já teda
Thank you for your answer. I wish you not to have to give up, but I wish you that the war ends as quickly as possible. Maybe we will meet here in Ji.hlava once the war has ended, maybe next year, when the Ukraine is free again in its original territory. Thank you, Illia. Thank you to our audience for your questions, and goodbye.